Jake stood vigilantly in front of the luxurious Manhattan high-rise where he worked as a security guard. His eyes scanned the bustling sidewalk, observing the comings and goings of residents and visitors alike. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of excitement, typical for a Thursday evening in New York City. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the polished marble entrance, Jake noticed a sleek black limousine pull up to the curb. The vehicle's tinted windows rolled down, revealing a man Jake had never seen before. This newcomer, who Jake would soon learn was Carter, stepped out with an air of confidence that immediately caught the guard's attention. Carter, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, approached the building's entrance. Jake watched as the man's eyes darted around, taking in every detail of his surroundings. There was something about Carter's demeanor that set Jake on edge, a barely perceptible tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that didn't match his easy smile. "Good evening," Carter greeted Jake smoothly. "I'm here to see Ryan Maxwell. I believe he's expecting me." Jake nodded, maintaining his professional demeanor despite his growing unease. "Of course, sir. May I have your name?" "Carter. James Carter," the man replied, his smile never wavering. "I'm a potential investor. Ryan and I have some exciting business to discuss." As Jake called up to confirm the appointment, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this James Carter. His instincts, honed by years of security work, were sending warning signals. However, with Ryan's confirmation, Jake had no choice but to let Carter pass. The following evening, the high-rise buzzed with activity as the annual charity gala got underway. Jake, stationed near the entrance to the grand ballroom, kept a watchful eye on the guests. His attention was drawn to Ryan, the charismatic millionaire who owned the building, as he made his way through the crowd. Jake observed as Ryan spotted Carter and made his way over, greeting him with enthusiasm. The two men fell into an easy conversation, laughing and gesturing animatedly. Jake couldn't help but notice how quickly Carter seemed to have gained Ryan's trust. The investor's charm was evident, but it only served to heighten Jake's suspicions. Throughout the evening, Jake kept a close watch on Carter's interactions. He noticed how the man seemed to know exactly what to say to each person he encountered, adapting his demeanor effortlessly. It was a skill that could be admired, but in Carter's case, it set off alarm bells in Jake's mind. As the gala wound down and guests began to depart, Jake overheard snippets of conversation between Ryan and Carter. They were discussing potential investment opportunities, with Carter painting vivid pictures of substantial returns. Ryan appeared captivated, his usual business acumen seemingly clouded by Carter's promises. Later that night, after his shift ended, Jake found himself unable to shake his concerns about Carter. He made his way to the security office, nodding to the night shift guard as he entered. Settling into a chair in front of the bank of monitors, Jake began to review the day's security footage. He fast-forwarded through hours of mundane activity until he spotted Carter leaving the building shortly after midnight. Curious, Jake switched to the external cameras, following Carter's movements. To his surprise, he watched as Carter made his way to a nearby bar, one known for its less than reputable clientele. Jake leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing as he observed Carter enter the establishment. The footage wasn't clear enough to make out details inside the dimly lit bar, but Jake could see Carter take a seat at a table occupied by 3 individuals. Their appearance and body language screamed trouble: hunched shoulders, furtive glances, hands that never strayed far from the inside of their jackets. The meeting lasted for nearly an hour, during which Jake watched the body language of all involved grow increasingly tense. When Carter finally emerged from the bar, his previously smooth demeanor had been replaced by a look of grim determination. As the security footage came to an end, Jake sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The Carter he had observed in the bar was a far cry from the polished investor who had charmed Ryan at the gala. This late-night meeting with suspicious characters only confirmed Jake's initial instincts. There was more to James Carter than met the eye, and whatever he was involved in spelled trouble for Ryan. Jake knew he had to act on this information, but he also understood the delicate nature of his position. Accusing a potential investor of nefarious activities without concrete evidence could jeopardize his job and his relationship with Ryan. However, the alternative, staying silent and potentially allowing Ryan to fall victim to whatever scheme Carter was orchestrating, was unthinkable. As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the office windows, Jake made his decision. He would find a way to warn Ryan about Carter, even if it meant putting his own career on the line. The safety and well-being of his employer, a man he had come to respect over the years, far outweighed any personal consequences he might face. With renewed determination, Jake began to formulate a plan. He would need to gather more evidence, perhaps enlist the help of trusted colleagues, and find the right moment to approach Ryan with his concerns. As he left the security office, Jake knew that the coming days would be crucial in unraveling the mystery surrounding James Carter and protecting Ryan from whatever danger lurked beneath the surface. The following morning, Jake arrived at work earlier than usual, his mind preoccupied with the information he had uncovered about Carter. He waited patiently in the lobby, knowing that Ryan typically arrived around 8 a.m. for his morning coffee run. As expected, the elevator doors opened, and Ryan stepped out, looking sharp in his tailored suit. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell," Jake greeted, his voice tinged with urgency. "Do you have a moment? There's something important I need to discuss with you." Ryan glanced at his watch, then back at Jake. "Walk with me, Jake. I'm running a bit late for a meeting." As they exited the building, Jake began to voice his concerns. "Sir, it's about James Carter. I've noticed some irregularities in his behavior. I believe he might not be who he claims to be." Ryan's eyebrows rose as he listened to Jake's account of the previous night's events. However, as Jake finished speaking, Ryan's expression shifted from curiosity to amusement. "Jake, I appreciate your concern, but I think you're being a bit paranoid," Ryan chuckled, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "Carter's a businessman. Sometimes that involves meeting with less conventional associates. It's all part of the game." Jake tried to interject, but Ryan held up a hand. "Look, I know you're just doing your job, and you're damn good at it, but Carter's investments could be a game changer for us. I need you to trust my judgment on this one, okay?" Frustration welled up inside Jake, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Of course, sir. I just wanted to make you aware of my observations." Ryan nodded, his attention already shifting to his upcoming meeting. "I appreciate it, Jake. Keep up the good work." With that, he hailed a taxi and was gone, leaving Jake standing on the sidewalk, feeling dismissed and increasingly worried. Later that afternoon, a commotion at the building's entrance caught Jake's attention. A woman with striking red hair and designer sunglasses was arguing with the receptionist. As Jake approached to intervene, he recognized her from photographs in Ryan's penthouse. It was Clara, Ryan's ex-girlfriend. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" Jake asked, positioning himself between Clara and the flustered receptionist. Clara turned to Jake, pushing her sunglasses up to reveal piercing green eyes. "Yes, there's a problem. I'm here to see Ryan, but this person won't let me up." Jake maintained his calm demeanor. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Ms. Clara Reeves," she replied, her tone softening slightly. "Ms. Reeves, Mr. Maxwell hasn't authorized any visitors today. Perhaps I could take a message for him." Clara's eyes narrowed. "A message? No, I don't think so. I've flown all the way from Paris to speak with him in person, and that's exactly what I intend to do." Jake could sense Clara's determination and realized that simply turning her away wasn't an option. He made a quick decision. "Allow me to call up to Mr. Maxwell's office and see if he's available." As Jake made the call, he observed Clara more closely. Despite her agitated state, There was an undeniable elegance about her. He could understand why she and Ryan had been a couple. To Jake's surprise, Ryan agreed to see Clara. As he escorted her to the elevator, Jake couldn't help but wonder about the timing of her arrival. With Carter's suspicious behavior and now Clara's unexpected return, he felt as though the pieces of a complex puzzle were slowly falling into place. Over the next few days, Jake noticed a shift in the dynamics of the building. Clara had taken up residence in one of the guest suites, and her presence seemed to have unsettled the usual routine. Ryan appeared distracted, often lost in thought as he moved between meetings. One evening, as Jake was finishing his shift, he encountered Clara in the lobby. She appeared agitated, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. "No, you don't understand," she was saying, her voice low but intense. "He's not listening to reason. This Carter person has him completely—" She broke off as she noticed Jake, quickly ending her call. Jake nodded politely, but Clara approached him instead of heading for the elevator. "You're Jake, right? Ryan's head of security?" "That's correct, Ms. Reeves. Is everything all right?" Clara glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "Not really, no. Jake, I need to talk to you about something, about Carter." Jake's interest was immediately piqued. "What about him?" Clara lowered her voice. "I've known Ryan for years, and I've never seen him so enamored with a business partner before. There's something off about Carter, I can feel it." Jake nodded, relieved to find someone who shared his suspicions. "I've had similar concerns. Have you noticed anything specific?" Clara bit her lip, considering her words carefully. "It's more of a gut feeling, really. But there was an incident, back when Ryan and I were together in Paris. A man who fits Carter's description was involved in a major investment scandal. It nearly ruined several of our friends." As Clara recounted the story, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The parallels were too strong to be coincidental. He realized that in Clara, he might have found an ally in his quest to uncover the truth about James Carter. "Ms. Reeves," Jake said, his voice low and serious, "I think we need to have a longer conversation about this. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow to discuss it further?" Clara nodded, relief evident in her eyes. "Absolutely. I'll do anything to protect Ryan, even if he doesn't think he needs protecting." As they parted ways, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Clara's help, he might finally be able to gather the evidence he needed to convince Ryan of the danger Carter posed. The game was far from over, and Jake was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The following morning, Jake met Clara in a small cafe 2 blocks from the apartment building. They chose a secluded corner booth, away from prying eyes and ears. Jake arrived first, ordering a black coffee and keeping a watchful eye on the door. When Clara entered, her red hair tucked under a low-brimmed hat, he nodded in acknowledgement. "I'm glad you came," Jake said, as Clara slid into the booth opposite him. "I think we need to pool our information if we're going to get to the bottom of this Carter situation." Clara nodded, her green eyes sharp and focused. "Agreed. Where should we start?" Jake pulled out a small notebook. "Let's begin with what we know about Carter's business dealings. You mentioned an investment scandal in Paris?" For the next hour, Jake and Clara exchanged information, piecing together a troubling picture of James Carter's past. Clara recounted the Paris incident in detail, describing how Carter, operating under a different name, had convinced several wealthy individuals to invest in a non-existent tech startup. By the time the fraud was discovered, Carter had vanished with millions of euros. Jake listened intently, jotting down notes and asking clarifying questions. He then shared his own observations. Carter's late-night meeting with suspicious individuals, his smooth talking at the gala, and the ease with which he had gained Ryan's trust. "We need hard evidence," Jake said, tapping his pen against the notebook. Suspicions and past incidents won't be enough to convince Ryan. He's too enamored with the potential profits Carter is promising. Clara leaned forward, her voice low. I might have an idea. I still have contacts in the financial world from my time with Ryan. Let me make some calls. See if I can dig up any information on Carter's current business ventures. Jake nodded. Good. I'll focus on his local activities. There might be a paper trail we can follow. Hotel reservations, car rentals, anything that could give us insight into his movements and associates. As they finalized their plan, Jake couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. With Clara's connections and his own investigative skills, they stood a real chance of uncovering the truth about James Carter. Over the next few days, Jake and Clara worked tirelessly, following every lead they could find. Jake used his security clearance to access building logs, tracking Carter's comings and goings. He also discreetly reached out to contacts in other security firms, trying to gather information on Carter's activities in the city. Clara, meanwhile, spent hours on the phone, speaking in hushed tones with old acquaintances in the financial sector. She pored over investment reports and news articles, searching for any mention of Carter or his known aliases. Their breakthrough came on the fourth day of their investigation. Clara burst into the security office, her face flushed with excitement. Jake, I've got something, she said, closing the door behind her. She spread several documents on his desk. Look at these. Carter's been involved in at least 3 other fraudulent investment schemes in the past 5 years: Chicago, San Francisco, and London. Each time, he used a different name, but the MO is the same. Jake leaned over the papers, his heart racing. The evidence was damning. Detailed accounts of Carter's schemes, complete with dates, amounts, and victim statements. This is exactly what we need, he said, looking up at Clara with newfound respect. How did you get all this? Clara allowed herself a small smile. Let's just say I still have friends in high places. The question is, what do we do now? Jake stood up, his decision made. We take this to Ryan. He has to see reason now. Later that afternoon, Jake requested a private meeting with Ryan. As he waited outside Ryan's office, he rehearsed what he would say, the evidence clutched tightly in his hand. Finally, Ryan's assistant ushered him in. Jake, Ryan greeted, looking up from his computer. What's so urgent? Taking a deep breath, Jake launched into his explanation. He laid out everything they had discovered about Carter, the past frauds, the suspicious meetings, the inconsistencies in his story. He presented the documents Clara had obtained, watching Ryan's face carefully for any reaction. As Jake finished speaking, he held his breath, waiting for Ryan's response. To his dismay, Ryan's expression remained impassive. Jake, Ryan said slowly, I appreciate the effort you've put into this. Really, I do. But did it ever occur to you that I might already be aware of Carter's colorful past? Jake blinked, taken aback. Sir? Ryan stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. The business world isn't always black and white, Jake. Sometimes, to get ahead, you need to work with people who operate in the gray areas. But sir, Jake protested, Carter is a criminal. He's defrauded people out of millions. He can't be trusted. Ryan turned back to face Jake, his expression hardening. I trust him to make me money, Jake. That's all that matters in this game. Now, I think it's time you went back to focusing on building security and left the business decisions to me. Jake stood there, stunned. He had been so sure that the evidence would convince Ryan that it would open his eyes to the danger Carter posed. Instead, he found himself being dismissed, his concerns brushed aside once again. As he left Ryan's office, Jake felt a mix of frustration and determination. Ryan might not be willing to listen, but Jake knew he couldn't give up. With Clara's help, he would find a way to protect Ryan, even if it meant going against his wishes. The stakes were too high to back down now. The day after Jake's failed attempt to convince Ryan of Carter's true nature, an unexpected event occurred that set off a new chain of suspicions. Jake was at his usual post in the lobby when a sleek, cherry-red Ferrari pulled up to the curb. The delivery driver, dressed in an immaculate uniform, stepped out and approached the front desk. "I have a delivery for Mr. Ryan Maxwell," the driver announced, handing over a set of keys and an envelope. Jake's instincts immediately kicked into high gear. He intercepted the delivery, examining the envelope closely. "I'll need to verify this with Mr. Maxwell before accepting it," he said firmly. After a quick call to Ryan's office, Jake learned that the car was indeed expected, a gift from Carter, apparently as a gesture of their blossoming partnership. Despite Ryan's enthusiasm, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this extravagant gift was more than just a friendly gesture. As soon as his shift ended, Jake began investigating the origin of the Ferrari. He started by contacting the delivery company, using his security credentials to request information about the order. The company was hesitant at first, but Jake's persistence paid off. The order was placed by a Mr. James Carter, the company representative finally revealed. Payment was made through a series of wire transfers from different accounts. This information only deepened Jake's suspicions. Why would Carter use multiple accounts for a simple car purchase? He decided to dig deeper into the financial trail. Over the next few hours, Jake called in favors from contacts in various banks and financial institutions. As he pieced together the information, a troubling pattern emerged. The accounts used to purchase the Ferrari were linked to a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts, a classic setup for money laundering operations. Jake's heart raced as he realized the implications. The Ferrari wasn't just a gift, it was potentially part of a larger scheme to involve Ryan in Carter's illegal activities. By accepting such an expensive gift, Ryan could unknowingly be implicated in whatever Carter was planning. Knowing he needed to act fast, Jake reached out to Clara. They agreed to meet at a nearby diner to discuss his findings. The diner was nearly empty when Clara arrived, sliding into the booth across from Jake. Her face was etched with concern as Jake recounted his discoveries. "This is worse than we thought," Clara said, her voice low. "If Ryan accepts this car, he could be walking into a trap. We need to find a way to make him see the danger." Jake nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I've tried talking to him, but he won't listen. He's convinced that Carter's past doesn't matter, as long as he's making money now." Clara's eyes narrowed in thought. Maybe we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Instead of trying to convince Ryan about Carter's character, we need to show him the immediate danger he's in. "What do you have in mind?" Jake asked, leaning forward. "We need to create a situation where Ryan sees Carter's true colors for himself," Clara explained. "If we can catch Carter in the act of something illegal or unethical, Ryan won't be able to ignore it." Jake considered this for a moment. It was risky, but it might be their best chance at opening Ryan's eyes. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's come up with a plan." For the next hour, Jake and Clara brainstormed ideas, weighing the risks and potential outcomes of each. They finally settled on a strategy that would involve baiting Carter into revealing his true intentions. As they wrapped up their meeting, Jake felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Their plan was dangerous, and if it backfired, he could lose his job, or worse. But the alternative, standing by while Ryan potentially ruined his life and business, was unthinkable. "We'll need to move quickly," Jake said as they prepared to leave. "The longer that Ferrari sits in the garage, the more entangled Ryan becomes in whatever Carter is planning." Clara nodded, her expression determined. "I'll start setting things in motion on my end. Be ready to move at a moment's notice." As they parted ways, Jake couldn't help but feel that they were entering a new phase of their investigation, one that would either save Ryan or potentially destroy everything they were trying to protect. The stakes had never been higher, and Jake knew that every move from this point on would be crucial. He walked back to his apartment, his mind racing with the details of their plan. The New York City night buzzed around him, oblivious to the high-stakes game unfolding in its midst. Jake steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that the next few days would test his skills, his loyalty, and his resolve like never before. Jake and Clara spent the next few days meticulously planning their strategy to expose Carter. They decided that the best approach would be to orchestrate a situation where Carter would feel pressured to reveal his true intentions. The opportunity presented itself when Ryan mentioned an upcoming business dinner with Carter at an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Jake, using his position as head of security, arranged to be present at the restaurant under the guise of ensuring Ryan's safety. Clara, leveraging her past relationship with Ryan, secured an invitation to join the dinner, claiming she wanted to discuss potential European investments. On the night of the dinner, Jake arrived early, positioning himself discreetly near the private dining room, where Ryan, Carter, and Clara would be seated. He wore an earpiece, allowing him to communicate with Clara if necessary. As Ryan and Carter arrived, Jake observed their interaction closely. Carter exuded confidence, his hand resting casually on Ryan's shoulder as they walked in. Ryan, for his part, seemed completely at ease in Carter's presence, laughing at something the other man had said. Clara arrived shortly after, turning heads in a stunning red dress. Jake noticed a flicker of surprise, and then wariness cross Carter's face as he saw her. It was clear he hadn't expected her presence. As the group settled into their seats, Jake moved closer, pretending to check the room's security while keeping an ear on the conversation. The initial small talk was mundane, discussions about the menu, comments on the restaurant's ambiance. But as the first course arrived, Clara began to subtly steer the conversation towards business. "So, James," Clara said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, "Ryan tells me you have some exciting investment opportunities in the works. I'd love to hear more about them. After all, I still have quite a few connections in Europe who might be interested." Jake watched as Carter's demeanor shifted slightly. There was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Of course, Clara," Carter replied smoothly. "I'd be happy to discuss them, though I must say, I'm surprised by your sudden interest in our ventures." Clara laughed lightly, but Jake could hear the edge in it. "Oh, you know me, James. I've always had a nose for good opportunities. And when Ryan mentioned the potential returns, well, let's just say my interest was piqued." As the conversation progressed, Clara continued to press Carter for details, her questions becoming increasingly pointed. She inquired about specific financial projections, asked about the structure of the investments, and even brought up some of Carter's past ventures, without revealing that she knew about their fraudulent nature. Jake observed Carter growing more and more uncomfortable. The man's responses became vaguer, and he frequently tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics. Ryan, however, seemed oblivious to the underlying tension, enthusiastically supporting Carter's claims about the potential profits. As the main course arrived, Clara decided to push harder. "You know, James," she said, swirling her wine glass, "I couldn't help but notice some similarities between this venture and an investment opportunity I heard about in Paris a few years ago. The one that ended rather poorly for several of my friends. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" The effect was immediate. Carter's face paled slightly, and he reached for his water glass, taking a long sip before responding. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, Clara. Perhaps you could refresh my memory?" Jake tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. He could see that Clara had struck a nerve, but Carter was doing his best to maintain his composure. Ryan, finally sensing the tension, looked between Clara and Carter with a confused expression. "What's this about Paris? Carter, have you done business there before?" Before Carter could respond, Clara pressed on. "Oh, it was quite the scandal. A charming businessman, much like yourself, James, convinced several wealthy individuals to invest in a promising tech startup. Only, it turned out the whole thing was a sham. The businessman disappeared with millions, leaving his investors in financial ruin. Carter's knuckles were white as he gripped his fork. "That sounds like a terrible situation, Clara. But I assure you, my business practices are entirely above board. Perhaps we should focus on the present rather than dredging up old stories." Jake could see that Carter was on the defensive, but they hadn't quite pushed him far enough to reveal his true nature. He knew they needed something more, a final push that would force Carter to show his hand. As the tension at the table continued to build, Jake realized that the next few moments would be crucial. Either they would succeed in exposing Carter, or their plan would backfire spectacularly. He steeled himself, ready to act at a moment's notice, knowing that the safety and future of his employer hung in the balance. As the dinner came to an end, Jake observed Carter hastily excusing himself, citing an important phone call he needed to make. The tension from Clara's probing questions had clearly rattled him. Jake saw an opportunity and decided to follow Carter discreetly. He watched as Carter exited the restaurant, pulling out his phone and walking briskly down the street. Jake maintained a safe distance, blending in with the evening crowd of Manhattan. He noticed Carter's agitated body language. The man was constantly looking over his shoulder, his free hand clenched into a fist. After a few blocks, Carter ducked into an alley between two buildings. Jake positioned himself at the corner, straining to hear the conversation. Carter's voice was low and urgent. "Listen, we need to speed things up," Carter hissed into the phone. "That bitch from Paris is here. She knows something. No, I don't think she has proof, but we can't take any chances. Get everything ready. We'll move on Maxwell's assets by the end of the week." Jake's heart raced as he processed this information. His suspicions were confirmed. Carter was indeed planning to con Ryan out of his wealth. He needed to inform Clara immediately. As Carter ended the call and began to head back to the restaurant, Jake quickly moved away, blending back into the crowd. He sent a quick text to Clara. "Meet me at the usual place in 30 minutes. It's worse than we thought." Jake arrived at their meeting spot, a small, dimly lit park a few blocks from the restaurant, before Clara. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the implications of what he'd overheard. When Clara finally arrived, slightly out of breath and still in her dinner attire, Jake quickly filled her in on Carter's phone conversation. Clara's face paled as she listened. "End of the week? That doesn't give us much time. We need to act fast, Jake." Jake nodded grimly. "I agree. But we still don't have concrete evidence. It's our word against his, and Ryan seems too enamored with the promise of profits to listen to reason." Clara bit her lip, thinking, what if we could catch him in the act? If we could get proof of him meeting with his accomplices or accessing Ryan's financial information? "It's risky," Jake warned. "If we're caught, we could lose everything. And there's no guarantee Ryan would believe us even then." "We don't have a choice," Clara insisted. "Ryan's entire fortune, his life's work, is at stake. We have to try." Jake agreed reluctantly. They spent the next hour outlining a plan to surveil Carter's movements and potentially catch him in the act of fraud. As they parted ways, both felt the weight of the task ahead. The next morning, Jake woke up early, preparing for a long day of covert surveillance. He had just finished his coffee when his phone buzzed with a text message. His blood ran cold as he read it. "Back off, or things will get ugly. This is your only warning." The message was from an unknown number. Jake immediately tried to trace it, but it led nowhere, likely a burner phone. He debated whether to tell Clara about the threat, but decided against it for now. He didn't want to risk frightening her off when they were so close to uncovering the truth. Throughout the day, Jake shadowed Carter as best he could without arousing suspicion. He observed the man meeting with various individuals in coffee shops and parks, always speaking in hushed tones and looking around nervously. By evening, Jake was exhausted, but felt they were making progress. He had managed to snap a few photos of Carter with known criminals. Not enough to prove fraud, but certainly enough to raise serious questions about his character. As Jake was heading home, planning to meet Clara to share his findings, he felt a sudden presence behind him. Before he could react, a sharp pain exploded in the back of his head and everything went black. When Jake regained consciousness, he found himself in a dimly lit room, tied to a chair. His head throbbed, and he could feel blood trickling down the back of his neck. As his vision cleared, he saw a figure step out of the shadows. It was Carter, his face twisted in a menacing grin. "I warned you to back off, Jake," Carter said, his voice cold. "Now, we're going to have a little chat about minding your own business." Jake's mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this situation. He knew that Clara would be waiting for him, that she would realize something was wrong when he didn't show up. But would she be able to find him in time? And even if she did, how would they convince Ryan of the danger he was in? As Carter moved closer, cracking his knuckles ominously, Jake steeled himself for what was to come. He had gotten himself into this mess trying to protect Ryan, and now he would have to find a way out. Not just for his own sake, but for Ryan's as well. The real test of his loyalty and resourcefulness was about to begin. Jake's mind raced as he assessed his situation. He was bound tightly to the chair, his head throbbing from the earlier blow. Carter loomed over him, a mix of anger and triumph on his face. Despite the dire circumstances, Jake knew he couldn't give up. He had to find a way out, not just for his own sake, but for Ryan's as well. "You've been quite the nuisance, Jake," Carter said, pacing in front of him. "Always poking your nose where it doesn't belong. I tried to warn you off, but you just couldn't take a hint, could you?" Jake remained silent, his eyes darting around the room, searching for anything that might help him escape. The room appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, with dusty crates stacked against the walls and a single grimy window letting in a sliver of moonlight. "Nothing to say?" Carter taunted. "That's all right. You'll be talking soon enough. I need to know exactly what you and that red-headed bitch think you know about my operation." At the mention of Clara, Jake felt a surge of worry. Had they gotten to her too? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate threat in front of him. "You won't get away with this, Carter," Jake finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "People will notice I'm missing. They'll come looking for me." Carter laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "By the time anyone realizes you're gone, I'll be long gone with Maxwell's fortune. And you? Well, let's just say you'll have had an unfortunate accident." As Carter continued to monologue about his plans, Jake subtly tested his bonds. They were tight, but he could feel a slight give in the rope around his right wrist. If he could just create a distraction, he might be able to work it loose. Meanwhile, across town, Clara was growing increasingly worried. Jake was over an hour late for their meeting, and he wasn't answering his phone. She knew something was wrong. Jake was never late, especially not for something this important. Clara paced her hotel room, debating her next move. She couldn't go to the police. They had no proof of any crime, and Carter's connections might even work against them. She needed help, but who could she trust? An idea struck her. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Mike, it's Clara. I need your help. It's urgent." Mike, a former colleague from Clara's days in corporate security, listened intently as she explained the situation. Though initially hesitant, he agreed to help when he heard the desperation in Clara's voice. "I'll make some calls," Mike said. "We'll find Jake, but Clara, be careful. If these guys are as dangerous as you say, you might be in danger too." Clara thanked him and ended the call, feeling a small sense of relief. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Now she just had to figure out how to keep Ryan safe until they could expose Carter's true nature. Back in the warehouse, Jake had managed to work his right hand partially free. Carter, caught up in his own gloating, hadn't noticed. Jake knew he would only have one chance at this. As Carter turned his back, reaching for something on a nearby table, Jake made his move. With all his strength, he lurched forward, tipping the chair and crashing to the floor. The sudden noise startled Carter, giving Jake the moment he needed to slip his hand free. Carter whirled around, his face contorted with rage. "You little..." But Jake was already moving. Despite the pain shooting through his body, he rolled away from Carter's grasp, scrambling to his feet. His hands were still bound behind his back, but he was no longer tied to the chair. Carter lunged at him, but Jake ducked, using his body weight to ram into Carter's midsection. The two men crashed into the stack of crates, sending them toppling to the floor in a cacophony of splintering wood. In the chaos, Jake felt something sharp press against his bound hands. A broken piece of crate had landed just right, its jagged edge catching on the rope. He began sawing frantically, feeling the fibers start to give. Carter, recovering from the initial shock, was back on his feet. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun. "Enough of this," he snarled. "I'm ending this now." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He was running out of time. With one final desperate yank, he felt the rope snap. His hands were free. As Carter raised the gun, Jake dove behind a fallen crate. He heard the deafening crack of a gunshot, felt the splintering of wood near his head. But he was moving, fueled by adrenaline and the desperate need to survive. Jake's hand closed around a piece of broken wood. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. As Carter rounded the crate, gun aimed and ready, Jake swung with all his might. The makeshift weapon connected with Carter's hand, sending the gun clattering across the floor. Carter howled in pain and fury, but Jake was already moving, scrambling for the gun. His fingers closed around the cold metal, just as Carter tackled him from behind. They grappled on the dirty warehouse floor, each fighting for control of the weapon that could determine both their fates. In that moment, as he fought for his life, Jake knew that the outcome of this struggle would change everything. Whether he emerged victorious or not, nothing would ever be the same again. The struggle between Jake and Carter was fierce and desperate. They rolled across the warehouse floor, each trying to gain control of the gun. Jake's muscles screamed with effort as he fought against Carter's weight and strength. Despite his training, Jake found himself at a disadvantage, still weakened from his earlier captivity. Suddenly, Carter's elbow connected with Jake's temple, sending a burst of stars across his vision. In that moment of disorientation, Carter wrenched the gun from Jake's grasp. Jake's heart sank as he felt the cold barrel press against his forehead. "It's over," Carter snarled, his face inches from Jake's. "Any last words, hero?" Just as Jake closed his eyes, bracing for the worst, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. The door burst open and a flood of light poured in. Carter's head snapped up, momentarily distracted. "NYPD, drop your weapon." Jake seized the opportunity. With a surge of adrenaline, he knocked Carter's arm aside just as the gun went off. The bullet ricocheted off the concrete floor, missing Jake by inches. In the chaos that followed, Jake managed to scramble away as police officers swarmed into the warehouse, quickly subduing Carter. As Jake was helped to his feet by one of the officers, he saw a familiar face enter the warehouse. It was Clara, accompanied by a man Jake didn't recognize. "Jake!" Clara rushed over, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Are you all right? We've been searching everywhere for you." Jake nodded, still catching his breath. "I'm okay. How did you find me?" Clara gestured to the man beside her. "This is Mike, an old friend from my security days. He helped track Carter's movements and narrow down your location." As Jake was checked over by paramedics and gave his statement to the police, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. They had concrete evidence of Carter's criminal activities now, but there was still one crucial task left: convincing Ryan of the truth. The next morning, Jake and Clara made their way to Ryan's office. Despite the early hour, Ryan was already there, poring over documents. He looked up as they entered, his expression a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Jake? What's going on? I heard you were involved in some kind of incident last night." Ryan's eyes narrowed as he noticed Jake's bruised face and bandaged head. Jake took a deep breath. "Mr. Maxwell, there's something we need to tell you about Carter. It's important that you listen to everything we have to say." For the next hour, Jake and Clara laid out everything they had discovered about Carter's fraudulent activities. They presented the evidence they had gathered, including photos of Carter meeting with known criminals, financial records showing suspicious transactions, and Jake's own account of Carter's attempt on his life. As they spoke, Ryan's face cycled through a range of emotions: disbelief, anger, and finally, a deep, resigned sadness. When they finished, Ryan sat back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "I can't believe I was so blind," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to believe in the potential profits so badly that I ignored all the warning signs." Clara leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Ryan, it's not too late. The police have Carter in custody, but we need to act fast to secure your assets and undo any damage he might have already done." Ryan nodded, a new determination settling over his features. "You're right. Jake, Clara, I owe you both an apology and my gratitude. If it weren't for your persistence, I might have lost everything." Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Finally, Ryan understood the danger he had been in. "What matters now is stopping Carter's plan and protecting your interests, Mr. Maxwell." Ryan stood up, straightening his tie. "Agreed. Let's get to work. I'll call my lawyers and financial advisors. We need to go through every deal, every transaction Carter was involved in." As Ryan began making calls, Jake and Clara shared a look of relief. They had succeeded in their mission to protect Ryan, but they knew the road ahead would be challenging. Untangling the web of deceit Carter had woven would take time and effort. Jake's phone buzzed with a message from the police detective handling Carter's case. "Carter's singing like a canary," the message read. "Looks like he was part of a larger criminal organization. This could be bigger than we thought." Jake showed the message to Clara, both of them realizing that their ordeal might not be over yet. As they watched Ryan take charge of the situation, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The betrayal in Manhattan had been thwarted, but the echoes of Carter's schemes would likely be felt for some time to come. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Ryan, now fully aware of the danger he had narrowly escaped, threw himself into damage control. He assembled a team of lawyers, financial experts, and security consultants to comb through every aspect of his business dealings with Carter. Jake found himself in the center of the storm, coordinating security measures and liaising with the police as the investigation into Carter's criminal network deepened. He worked tirelessly, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as Jake was reviewing security footage in his office, Clara knocked on the door. She looked exhausted, but determined. "Jake, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "I've been going over the financial records with Ryan's team, and we found something alarming." Jake leaned forward, his fatigue forgotten. "What is it?" Clara spread out a series of documents on his desk. "It looks like Carter was planning to make a major move at the charity gala next week. He had set up a series of transactions that would have funneled millions of Ryan's funds into offshore accounts during the event." Jake's mind raced. The annual charity gala was one of the biggest events in Ryan's social and business calendar. It was attended by New York's elite, including potential investors and business partners. "We can't cancel the gala," Jake said, thinking out loud. "It would raise too many questions and could potentially damage Ryan's reputation if word got out about Carter's fraud." Clara nodded in agreement. "Exactly. But if we go ahead with it, we risk Carter's associates trying to carry out the plan without him." Jake stood up, pacing the room as he considered their options. Suddenly, An idea struck him. What if we use the gala to our advantage? We could set a trap, catch Carter's accomplices in the act. Clara's eyes lit up. That's brilliant, Jake, but it's also incredibly risky. We'd be putting Ryan and all the guests in potential danger. Not if we plan it carefully, Jake countered. We'll need to bring in the police, coordinate with Ryan's security team, and make sure we control every aspect of the event. They spent the next hour outlining their plan before presenting it to Ryan. To their relief, Ryan saw the potential in their strategy. It's a gamble, Ryan admitted, but if it works, we could not only protect my assets, but also bring down Carter's entire operation. With Ryan's approval, the next few days were spent in intense preparation. Jake coordinated with the police, setting up undercover officers who would pose as waitstaff and guests. Clara worked with Ryan's financial team to create a convincing but ultimately fake set of transactions that would lure Carter's accomplices into action. As the night of the gala approached, tension ran high. Jake found himself constantly checking and rechecking every detail of their plan. He knew that the slightest mistake could not only jeopardize their trap, but also put innocent lives at risk. The evening of the gala arrived, and the grand ballroom of Ryan's building was transformed into a glittering spectacle. Guests in elegant attire mingled, sipping champagne and engaging in polite conversation, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Jake, dressed in a tuxedo but with his earpiece firmly in place, scanned the room constantly. He spotted several of the undercover officers in position, their eyes alert for any suspicious activity. Clara, stunning in a silver gown, played her part perfectly. She moved through the crowd, engaging in small talk, while discreetly keeping an eye on the key players they had identified as potential accomplices of Carter. As the evening progressed, Jake's nerves were on edge. He watched as Ryan took to the stage to give his welcome speech, knowing that this was the moment they had been waiting for. According to their intelligence, this was when Carter's associates would attempt to initiate the fraudulent transactions. Ryan's voice rang out across the ballroom, smooth and confident. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming tonight. Before we begin the main proceedings, I have an important announcement to make. Jake tensed, his hand moving imperceptibly towards his concealed weapon. This was the signal they had agreed upon. In the next few moments, they would find out if their plan would succeed or if they had underestimated Carter's network. As Ryan continued to speak, Jake noticed movement in the crowd. Two men in expensive suits were making their way towards the back of the room, their hands reaching into their jackets. Jake's heart raced as he realized this was it. The moment of truth had arrived. As the two suspicious men made their move, Jake signaled to the undercover officers scattered throughout the room. In a matter of seconds, the calm atmosphere of the gala dissolved into controlled chaos. "NYPD, freeze!" shouted one of the officers, drawing his weapon. The two men, caught off guard, reached for their own guns, but they were quickly surrounded by several officers who had been posing as waitstaff. Guests gasped and moved back, creating a circle around the unfolding scene. Jake moved swiftly through the crowd, making his way to Ryan's side to ensure his safety. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." Ryan's voice boomed over the speakers, steady despite the tension in the room. "Everything is under control. I apologize for the disruption, but this was a necessary step to bring some dangerous individuals to justice." As the police officers handcuffed the two men and led them away, Jake noticed a third person trying to slip out through a side door. He quickly intercepted the individual, recognizing him as one of Carter's known associates. "Going somewhere?" Jake asked, blocking the man's path. The man's face paled as he realized he was cornered. Without warning, he shoved Jake aside and made a desperate dash for the exit. Jake recovered quickly, tackling the man just as he reached the door. They crashed to the ground, struggling briefly before Jake managed to subdue him. As the last of Carter's accomplices was led away in handcuffs, a sense of relief washed over Jake. Their plan had worked. They had successfully caught Carter's associates in the act, preventing the fraudulent transactions and gathering concrete evidence of the larger criminal operation. The gala guests, initially shocked by the sudden turn of events, now buzzed with excitement and curiosity. Ryan, ever the skilled orator, managed to turn the situation to his advantage, presenting it as a triumphant moment in the fight against white-collar crime. As the evening wound down and the last of the guests departed, Jake, Clara, and Ryan gathered in a quiet corner of the ballroom. "I can't believe we pulled it off," Clara said, the relief evident in her voice. Ryan nodded, a mix of gratitude and admiration in his eyes. "I owe you both more than I can ever repay. You saved not just my fortune, but my reputation and possibly my life." Jake, still running on adrenaline, allowed himself a small smile. "It's not over yet, Mr. Maxwell. We've dealt Carter's organization a significant blow, but there might still be loose ends to tie up." As if on cue, Jake's phone buzzed with a message from the detective in charge of Carter's case. His eyes widened as he read it. "What is it?" Clara asked. Noticing Jake's expression, Jake looked up, his face a mix of surprise and concern. "It's about Carter. He's agreed to turn state's evidence. He's going to reveal everything about his organization, including—" Jake paused, glancing at Ryan. "Some high-profile individuals who were involved." Ryan's face paled slightly. "High-profile individuals? Who?" Jake shook his head. "The detective doesn't have all the details yet, but he says it goes deep. Politicians, business leaders, maybe even some of the people who were here tonight," Clara finished, realization dawning on her face. Ryan slumped into a nearby chair, the weight of the situation hitting him. "My God, this is bigger than we thought, isn't it?" Jake nodded grimly. "It looks that way, sir." Carter was just the tip of the iceberg. His testimony could shake the foundations of New York's business and political world. Clara placed a comforting hand on Ryan's shoulder. "We'll get through this, Ryan. We've come this far. We'll face whatever comes next together." Ryan straightened up, a determined look replacing his momentary shock. "You're right. We've exposed this much of the corruption. We have a responsibility to see it through to the end, no matter where it leads." Jake felt a surge of respect for his employer. Despite the potential fallout, Ryan was committed to doing the right thing. "What's our next move?" Clara asked, looking between Ryan and Jake. Jake took a deep breath, his mind already racing with the implications of this new development. "We work with the authorities, provide them with everything we know, and we prepare for the storm that's coming. Because once Carter starts talking, nothing in this city will be the same." As they stood there, in the now empty ballroom that had just witnessed the first act of a much larger drama, Jake realized that their adventure was far from over. The betrayal in Manhattan had been thwarted, but it had opened the door to a much bigger conspiracy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jake knew that with Ryan's resources, Clara's intelligence, and his own determination, they were ready to face them. The night sky outside the windows seemed to darken, as if the city itself was bracing for the revelations to come. The true test of their strength, loyalty, and resilience was just beginning.